that is in-text citations. Let's talk about paraphrasing. A paraphrase restates another person's ideas in your own words. So paraphrasing is great because it's good for summarizing information. If you look at that, the literature review on page 61, and you read how the author is writing that, you'll notice that that author is sometimes summarizing an entire study or the conclusion of a study in just one sentence. They're not providing like whole gobs and gobs and gobs of detailed information. So that paraphrasing is a great skill to help you summarize and synthesize for a literature review. Now this quote comes from page 269. And I'm quoting, and you know, we're going to talk about this in a second. When do I paraphrase? When do I quote? I'm quoting here because the APA is the authority on this subject. So I'm not just going to, in my presentation to you, the students, I'm not just giving you a paraphrased version of what the APA book is saying. At this point, I want to point out specifically what this authority on the subject has to say about this. And that's a reason to quote, because there's an authority on the subject, and their specific words are going to carry more weight than my summarized or paraphrased version of their words. So published authors paraphrase their sources most of the time, rather than directly quoting the sources. Student authors should emulate this practice by paraphrasing more than directly quoting. Now remember that, because that's going to be, for our literature review and for our synthesis paragraph this week, that's going to be a kind of hard and fast rule. Like, you should be paraphrasing, not quoting. We do a lot of quoting in my discipline in English when we're analyzing poetry or song lyrics or you know, a book or a short story. We're doing a lot of quoting because in those situations we're analyzing literature, and literature is all about the specific words and the word choice of the author and the ambiguity and the meaning of the words and symbolism and things like that. When you're summarizing information about nursing or about forestry or about, I mean, that's the specific words of the individual author. Like, we're not looking at Shakespeare here and like where there's some sort of like artistic use of language here. We're looking at facts and information, and so that's it's much more crucial to paraphrase that information. Again, treat your reader's time as more valuable than your own. You're kind of doing some of the digestion for the reader, and then if the reader wants the details, if the reader wants to read the original author's words, they can go find that source and do so. So here are some guidelines on how to paraphrase, because over the years, I see how difficult it can be for students to paraphrase sometimes, and it's not always the easiest process. It takes a little bit of, you know, kind of brain crunching and experimentation to get it to work. So we're going to take an idea from the textbook, which is this sentence, appears on page 268. It says, if a reference has a group author, the name of the group can sometimes be abbreviated. So let's say I was writing a paper about how to do citations in APA. We're going meta level here, right? So I'm writing this paper about APA formatting. And I want to show that a group author can sometimes be abbreviated. So before I try to paraphrase this sentence and put it in my own words, the first thing I need to do is just make sure, do I understand what the sentence means? And that's, you might feel like, oh, of course I understand what it means. But sometimes we just need to double check. So first of all, what does APA mean by reference? It says if a reference has a group author. So again, they're talking about like the sources that we're using. They're talking about the way that we're referring to the author in the in-text citation. They're not talking about the references page. So that's something to just be aware of. What do they mean by sometimes? So it says sometimes it can be abbreviated. Okay, well, so if the abbreviation is well known, if it will help avoid cumbersome repetition, or if it will appear at least 3 times in the paper. And I should have provided a page number for this, but you can find more information about that in the textbook for the rule for when we would abbreviate. I think it might be on page 268, actually, if I'm remembering correctly. And then the third one, abbreviated how? So how are we abbreviating these things? So for example, would I write STAN period UNIV period to abbreviate Stanford University? No, it would be using acronyms. So we're referring to, like, let's say, for example, the National Institutes of Mental Health is frequently abbreviated NIMH. And so I would not necessarily have to put in parentheses National Institute of Mental Health. I could just simply put NIMH, and that would be sufficient. Okay, so got it. Now this is what I'm trying to paraphrase. I understand it. So that's the first step. So the second step is to identify keywords that can or cannot be changed. So first, let's take a look before we think about changing them. Let's just identify what are the keywords here. So reference is obviously a keyword, right? It's the material that we're talking about. Group author is a keyword. It's this type of author, right? The name of the group can sometimes be abbreviated. So abbreviated sounds like a specific function, right? So we've got these three specific keywords. Like try to find, like, narrow down, like, what are the main bits in the sentence? Like, what are the biggest chunks in the sentence, so to speak. In linguistics, we refer to, like, content words and function words. Content words are nouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs. They are things. They are concepts, ideas, physical things in the real world, etc. Whereas function words are words like if, words like from. They show relationships between things, but they're not a concept or a thing in and of themselves. So those types of content words, those are going to be the things to focus on in a paraphrase, because sometimes you can change the words, sometimes you can't, sometimes it doesn't make sense to change the words. So let's take a look at this example. So we could change the word reference to source, for example. So because we said the references, right, they're talking about, like, specific sources in our that we read as a part of our research. So we could use the word source. Now let's think about what they mean by abbreviated. We said on the last page, when names are abbreviated, they become acronyms, right? So NIMH for National Institutes of Mental Health. So we could use the word acronym maybe as a substitution for abbreviation. We'll take a look at that a little bit more in a second. Let's take a look at the word group author, though. That's a keyword. I could change that into, let's say, for example, like organization as an author, or entity without a name, like without personal names or something like that. Like anytime I'm trying to find any way to, like, recast that idea or rephrase that idea. And every example that I'm coming up with, if you guys come up with a better one, like, send me an email, let me know, because I don't know. I don't think that we can come up with a better phrase than group author. So if for example, I wanted to say organization as an author, I mean, that would be fine. But one thing we want to avoid when we're paraphrasing, that makes it a little bit wordier, right? That's 4 words instead of 2. We don't want to paraphrase to end up making things like super duper wordy. So in this type of situation, I found that the other words are words that I can rephrase, I can recast them. So one word, a 2-word phrase, that's acceptable. That's an acceptable level of using the original author's words. And in this case, I don't need to quote it necessarily, because it's not really it doesn't have, like, a special meaning in this sentence. So once we've got those keywords, let's isolate them. So we're talking about sources, we're talking about group authors, we're talking about acronyms, right? And again, think about this idea. The idea we're talking about here is, if a reference has a group author, the name of the group can sometimes be abbreviated. So, okay, let's think about what are the relationships between these words. So group author and acronym, what's the relationship between those two? A group author has a name, right? And that name could be represented using an acronym. So you can use an acronym to represent the name of a group author, right? That would be a way of just rephrasing that idea. Notice by just isolating those words, I can come up with my own language a lot easier, because I'm just thinking about what do those things have to do with each other, and I'll put it into my own words. What's the relationship between the group author and the source? Well, the source is written by the group author, right? And the group author writes the source, so they're the creator of the source. Is there a relationship between acronym and source? So if you think about that for a second, is there a relationship between the source and then the acronym? And you might say like, well, yeah, like the NIMH, for example, if they author a pamphlet and then that's their source, then you could say like the acronym is the author of the source. But the acronym is not really the author of the source. The acronym is the refers to the author, not to the source. So if I think about these two as having a relationship, it's hard. I'm hard pressed to identify a clean, clear, direct relationship between the two. Now, this is helpful because this shows me that as I recast my ideas, I don't necessarily want to put acronym and source together. So we can recast the sentence any dozens of ways. So there's no one right way to do this, right? So for example, I could say, for certain sources, an acronym can be used in place of spelling out the full name of a group author. Okay, that would work. I could say sources with what APA calls, quote, group authors may be better stated as acronyms. Now, in this case, I decided to put quotation marks around it because I've got this here verb, the APA calls. So I'm using that narrative in-text citation, the narrative citation, excuse me. And I'm referring to their to that by specifically. So that's a reason to use the quotation marks. In general, if you're not using 3 or more words in a row, then you're not required to quote. Unless, I mean, if you're using, if this is where like, there's no like one solid rule that captures all situations. There are some examples where maybe an author refers to a situation using a certain word, and that word becomes either like a new term for it, then, and I was referring to, and I'm referring in my paper to this author coming up with this term, then I would want to put quotation marks around it. If I'm, for some reason in a paper kind of like describing an author's like argument or position on a certain topic using a certain word, like this person describes it this way, then that would be a reason to put quotation marks around it. But as a general rule, 3 or more words is in a row always needs to be quoted. When there's 2 or 1, it depends on the situation. It's kind of a gut call. And I hope my explanation here kind of made sense, but if you have questions about it as you're doing your literature review, just send me an email, like say, okay, this is one of those weird situations. Do I need to quote, or do I need to just, can I let it fly? And I'll be able to give you some guidance on that. Here was our original, going back to our original phrasing. So it said, if the reference has a group author, the name of the group can sometimes be abbreviated, right? Well, another thing that we can do to help us paraphrase, if you have a complex or a compound sentence, you can flip the parts of that sentence, which is really, I find this really exciting aspect of the language, because we can change the emphasis, or we can reorganize that sentence just by flipping it. So the blue right here, the blue part is our subordinate clause if a reference has a group author, and the green part is our main clause. The name of the group can sometimes be abbreviated, but I could flip those two and the sentence will still make sense. The name of an author can sometimes be abbreviated if the reference has a group author. Right, makes sense. Now notice I had to tweak a couple of the words, because if I said the name of the group can sometimes be abbreviated if a reference has a group author. If I said that, like, that would be a little unclear what am I referring to with group here? So I could say the name of an author can sometimes be abbreviated if the reference has a group author. Then now that I've rearranged the sentence, now I can go ahead and recast that. So using the steps that I talked about in the previous slide. So on occasion, the author's name can be shortened to an acronym if the author of a source is an entire organization, or what APA calls a, quote, group author. Now notice that I made this one a little bit wordier. There may be a situation that calls for that. Just kind of depends on your needs, I guess, at the time. And notice here too, I'm providing that in-text citation, whether I do a quote or whether I paraphrase. So Yep, there we go. Even paraphrases need in-text citations, so keep that in mind.